When faced with the daunting task of developing a vaccine for the COVID-19 virus, scientists looked to other viruses like SARS and even influenza for clues to build their understanding. What they were doing was activating prior knowledge to develop and make sense of the new knowledge coming in. And in creating an online course, this is the number one thing you need to know about your students to optimize the learning experience. I'm Andrew Barry, and I'm back today with another video in this series on how to teach on the internet. Let's dive into prior knowledge. As humans, instead of starting every single time with a blank page, we draw on our prior experiences to make sense of the world around us. Activating prior knowledge, like the scientists fighting COVID-19, isn't something that only scientists do. In fact, we've been doing it since we were babies. As infants and children, it's how we made connections with new things in the world around us as we expanded our ideas and learned to do things like talk and count and read. As adults, it's how we build on our capabilities. Think back to when you learned about a new app on your phone or on your computer. I bet you that what you were doing is making comparisons between the functions and features of this new app, comparing it to apps that you're already familiar with. What's happening here reveals the power of activating prior knowledge. To really understand prior knowledge, we first need to understand the concept of advanced organizers. So advanced organizers were first introduced by this guy, a psychologist by the name of David Ausubel. And what they are basically pieces of information introduced to us in advance of learning something new to help us assimilate and organize the new concepts we're learning. A lot of people jump to the conclusion at this point that we're talking about overviews or summaries, but that's not what advanced organizers are. Advanced organizers are more abstract, more general than that. To get a little more specific here, Ausubel puts advanced organizers into two categories. So we'll talk about comparative and expository advanced organizers. Right, so comparative organizers are when the learner or student has some advanced knowledge or experience that is similar to the new ideas being taught. The most powerful examples of these kind of organizers are stories or analogies that they can use to make sense of this new information. And in learning design, we use them to anchor new ideas within existing frameworks in the learner's mind. So, for example, in teaching CEOs about executive leadership, a comparative advanced organizer might be contrasting and comparing ideas from thought leaders like Carol Dweck and Angela Duckworth to introduce and explain mental models that the leaders can use to apply the new ideas to their real-world experience. Okay, so the other type of advanced organizer are expository advanced organizers. And these are used when the learner doesn't have any prior knowledge at all of the topic. These types of organizers often take the form of a very well-structured introduction to a topic to create a mental map for the person that is going to be exploring that topic to start to hang their ideas on. So if we were to use our previous example about teaching executive leadership, this would be useful if we were to teach this concept or some of these concepts to pre-teens. In this instance, we'd use expository advanced organizers to get to the core of what leadership is and why it might be important for them in their context. And just like any learning principle, you can't just throw advanced organizers at a learner and expect them to retain everything that's been presented. So my tip for applying these ideas in a way that increases learning retention is to always aim to meet two conditions. The first is that learners must process and understand the information. So if your story or analogy that you're presenting, for example, of a comparative advanced organizer, doesn't stick, if you don't land that story with your audience in a way that resonates with them, they're simply not going to remember it. And it's not going to have the effect you want as you start to introduce new ideas. So really making sure that the story is going to resonate with your audience helps to understand the audience really deeply at this point, which is where your research into their prior level of knowledge comes in handy. And secondly, be very clear about pointing out relationships between concepts if you're using expository advanced organizers to help frame and structure the presentation of new material. All right, so let's have a look at how to put this all together so that we can activate prior knowledge. Building on what we already know about advanced organizers, here are 2 practical ways to apply them in creating your course. First of all, present the most general form of your idea first, and then gradually layer in complexity and detail. What really helps with this is thinking about the first principles of what you're trying to communicate. Asking yourself, why is something important? Whatever your answer to that is, ask why is that important? And then do that same thing 5 times. It's called the 5 whys, and it really helps get to the real core first principle of what it is you're trying to teach. Then, once you've established that baseline, integrate new material by specifically referring back to the concepts that you introduced as advanced organizers to help people see the relationships and compare and contrast ideas for them so that they can start to build that mental representation for themselves. So how do you practically do this in course design? I've got 4 examples I want to share with you. Number 1, ask your students at the beginning of any new session or new topic to predict what that session will be about, and then ask them to justify those predictions with their prior knowledge. What you'll find is that these ideas, these assumptions, these guesses in some cases will actually help people orientate themselves when that new material is presented. Number 2, and this is somewhat similar but a little bit nuance of a difference, is ask them questions to test their knowledge about new topics that they haven't been exposed to yet. What this will get them to do is to think critically and draw on some comparisons and some analogies and stories that they are familiar with to see if they can answer these questions. This is priming them to then consume and assimilate and understand the presentation of new material as you start introducing it. All right, number 3 is something that you can try during the presentation of new material, is to specifically call it out and to ask them to draw comparisons between the new ideas that they're being presented and things they already know. This is a great reflection exercise, which I highly recommend you put into your online course. And finally, a pretty simple one that you can definitely try right away is to just ask why questions before you introduce new material. So let's go back to the example of effective leadership. Simply asking why is effective leadership important can open up an extremely rich discussion, which again primes people to receive new information and to take that on board and to make connections with things that they already understand, which come to the surface in answering that question. The great thing here is that even wrong answers can lead to a much higher level of retention from the learner. Okay, so there was a lot covered there. I want to go over 3 main takeaways here to help you organize the advanced organizers that we've introduced in this concept of activating prior knowledge in your students. Number 1, always direct attention to what is important. We always want to be told what to pay attention for because our attention is constantly being competed for. So in designing your curriculum, always try and identify 3 to 5 things max that you want someone to take away with that, and see if you can map that back to the prior level of knowledge of your students. The second takeaway is highlight the relationships between concepts for students. Remember, students are not mind readers. Help them connect the dots. And finally, remind students of the prior knowledge that they can draw on to grasp the new concepts you're introducing. This is a great time to use the questions we just talked about. Right, so that's it. That's activating prior knowledge. And none of these learning principles can ever be applied in isolation. So make sure you take this with all the other videos that we're slowly adding to this channel to form a picture for yourself about what you want to be focusing on for your online course. With that said, like and subscribe to make sure that you get notified of the next videos, and keep an eye on this playlist at the very top of my channel as we keep adding more principles on learning, on writing, and all the interesting things that I've been reading. Thank you for joining for this week. I will see you next week.